Hi everyone, it's Toby from Toby's Urban Sketch. Thanks for joining me for this lighthouse sketch. I've got a couple of interesting focuses today. Towards the beginning, we'll be talking a lot about how you can use hatching to get character, texture, shape. In the middle, we'll be using a few techniques to get lovely variations in colours, but only using 4 colours. And then at the end, if you stay with me till the very end, I've got some great tips on how to use those splatters to enhance your image and get a little bit of beautiful randomness. The reference we're using today is from a brilliant artist called jcp.arts on Instagram. He's great, so if you follow the link, follow him, you can find the reference and get inspired at the same time. I've got myself an A4 bit of paper, watercolour paper. I have got 2 brushes. I've got my Skoda Versatile size 10 travel, just a round travel brush. And then I've just got a 1-inch flat brush for making a nice big sky with. My pens are a 0.1 and a 0.3 Rotring pen. They're quite a bold pen, not quite as subtle as a Winsor Newton or Unipin, but fun to experiment with occasionally. I've got a couple of watercolour pencils out today. I've no real plans to use them, but just in case, I've got them out. And then I've got my normal set of watercolours. So let's get straight into this. Now, as ever, going to start with a nice thin fine liner. So I've got my 0.1 fine liner. This reference, right, is the lighthouse is very much framed in the whole composition. And then it's got this really awkward set of stairs coming down. I say awkward because they're not that exciting, but they take up a huge amount of space, don't they? And the perspective on them and all those details, pretty awkward. So I'm not sure what we're going to do with those, but these are the kind of fascinating decisions that we have to make. And, well, we don't have to, but it's what, one of the things that we get to do as an artist is decide what our image looks like, even if there's something in there we don't like. So let's just start anyway. I'm going to start by where's my little grid of thirds, so that's how you can find a nice place to sit your focal point. I'm just going to pop that in there for you. So this would be splitting the page into thirds, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And you want your focal point to sit somewhere along these lines. So what we can actually do is we can get maybe the main lighthouse sitting up here, and then our building following along there. So that's a quite nice way of just deciding without too much effort how to frame things without having to do a preparatory sketch or something. The other way of doing it, of course, is to do a thumbnail or something. I've done little videos on both of those ideas recently, so I'll pop little links to them as well. I'm just going to start with our lighthouse, and I don't want to get it too big because I want a big sky in here. So I'm cropping out the photographer's frame. And we're just going to start with the big shapes because there's loads of details going on and we can work out in a minute or in a few minutes if we're going to add them. And I want it to be nice and just wibbly wobbly, loose and interesting. And then we come down the side here. And we need to just be careful not to go too far. I say we need to be careful, it doesn't really matter, let's just, bring it down a bit too far just to prove it doesn't really matter. When I say too far, it's because this building comes in at a fun angle, doesn't it? So the perspective again is really interesting because it's coming in at quite a sharp angle. That's about right, so that's the top of the roof and the lip. And then the side of the building comes down here, and then can't really see it too well because it's covered by this railing, but let's just do a really loose line just to give our brain something to work with. And again, we've got this side here. In the photo it's very thin. I'm going to widen it out a bit so we can make a bit more of that gorgeous area of shadow. And the perspective on the actual roof again is really awkward. It's really challenging to work out exactly what's going on if we're trying to draw it. So I just encourage you to just take it gently and just sense check, and to me it looks like it's going up a long way up here and a tiny bit coming back towards us there. I hope that makes sense. Okay, and that's most of the detail, most of the shapes in already. And then this side sort of comes down like this, doesn't it? And then let's just go back in and start working in a little bit more interesting detail. On this side we've got all the shadows, so just going to intensify the lines, get this window in, and get that shape by giving it that inside lip as well. And then just there's some little textures going on the bottom here. And I want to just separate the lighthouse out from the surroundings a bit more. And then get this idea, there's some complex things going on at the top. And we don't have to work out exactly what those complexities are. But if we just get enough suggestions, so there's a little lip, so I've got 2 lines to suggest a lip, then there's another lip so we can bring in a 3rd line, then there's all these sort of diamonds coming in. Just build those up with a few little diamond shapes as well. Before you know it, you're almost there. Down the side of the building we've got like a drain pipe. We've got a couple of windows, so let's just pop in the bases of them, and then we can come up, and they look to be about right, and then get in these fascinating shutters and just get a little bit of those textures in as well. There's these, they're made of wood, they've got little boards coming across, so we just add some loose lines to suggest that. And the top's got a sort of little angled shape to it. So I'm doing a little bit more detail and thought into this sketch than perhaps some of my sketches. But it's all the same principles, it's all just picking out shapes, deciding on the amount of detail you want in, deciding what you're going to leave out. Now we get to the confusing bit where it's sort of covered by railings and not. What I'm going to do though is just start as if it's not covered by railings. So we'll get this door in, and then we'll just get these windows in, and we're going to pretend that we can see to the bottom of the windows, keeping the windows just in that same loose style as the windows up here, and the same over with this last window. And yeah, in reality the bottom is covered, isn't it, by the railings and things, but I moan about the railings enough, so I'm going to have to make some decisions about how I'm including them, whether I'm fully including them. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to change our angle of vision a bit, so that this wall, which in the reference comes up to about here, but I'm going to make it so this wall comes to about here. So we're going to have a little bit of pavement that we can see just in this gap, and we're just going to have a few steps down. We're not going to have these steps going all the way. We just go maybe down to there, getting looser and looser. And just steps can just be really simple sets of parallel lines like this, and just offset the ends a bit so that they're gradually moving. And this kind of looser version of steps gives you that idea of being in the countryside, or well, on the coast I suppose, but being in nature rather than in a artificial environment. And then we can pop up some banisters maybe, just to be slightly faithful to our image, but without having to stick rigidly to something that we don't necessarily like. And then we can get these banisters up as well, and just keep them coming along. And they stop about here, don't they? Let's just take them one more along, and then give this kind of loose double line, gives you the idea of what's going on, without labouring the point too much. And then we want to give a bottom to this area, don't we, so that we understand that it's going down somewhere. We can do that just by simple lines and then little lines of perspectives, and we can start to join up some of these steps and just add in some more textures and go make this area look complicated enough that we're filling in the gap. But notice, I mean, to me that's quite effective. You can disagree if you like, of course, always. But I certainly haven't actually drawn steps. I've just made some perspective lines going up, showing us that this is a vertical structure against a horizontal structure, and added in some just sort of textures to let the eye, the brain of whoever is watching this, reading this, reviewing this, to let them decide what's going on here, exactly what the steps are, and without looking closely they're not going to find particular fault with it. I'm just going to keep doing the same thing, and then this whole sort of mound tails off down here, doesn't it? And over this side we don't know what happens, so if we just drop off the detail, and that's done. I think we'd like to know that this wall is a brick wall, wouldn't we? I think it is suitably different from everything else, so let's get those suggestions of just little brick-like textures, and you can do that just with little squares, a few lines and things which don't quite meet up as bricks. And then this is more grassland, so let's just pop in some little random wiggles and shapes and little vertical bits, and those vertical bits will get bigger as they come towards us and in bigger clumps because the grass is closer, so we're seeing more of it. And then there's a few rocks and things, so we can do that with just some geometric shapes. It doesn't matter if, you know, we're not copying the exact rocks which are in there. I'm certainly not, but I'm getting the sort of, well, I'm trying at least to get the elements of things which are there. So we just got these ideas of little geometric shapes which have got a top and a side and another side. So I can just go here again and just add a side. Do you see what I mean? So before I had just a flat shape, and then just by coming down the bottom you can add in lines to give yourself a 3D object, a box essentially. And then let's solidify some of what we've done here. Just having to be a little bit careful because I've made up the bottom of this. We just need to be careful getting the perspective approximately right, and I got it a little bit wrong there. And then we're going to have to make up something going on behind the lighthouse as well, because we can now see over. So let's just pop in an idea of another fence on the other side. Okay, so we're almost there really with the lines, just with the purely the line work. I'm just going to come in and just retouch these places which have faded a bit. And today I want to use the pen quite a bit to add in some of those shadows and textures. We've done a fair bit already, but let's start with something obvious. So all the shadows are really clear on this lighthouse. So down this side we can just do some really simple hatching. So simple hatching, just fairly quick, all in one direction. I like just going on a diagonal, but you can go vertical or horizontal. I think it's just what's easiest for me, to be honest. And then we can do the same hatching here and just bring it so it's hitting onto those windows. And it doesn't have to all be the same length. Shadows are often a bit wobbly and wonky depending on the structure of the roof. And we'll have a little bit here. There isn't shadow down here, but I'm just going to add some shadow because I think it gives shape and contrast, showing us two connecting structures rather than just leaving these two connecting structures not so obvious. I've changed the direction of my hatching. To be honest, the main reason is because it's easier for me to hatch going up this way around, and I think I do it automatically, but also being on a new structure, just showing that the hatching is going another way is another way of basically just demonstrating to the eye really easily that we've changed. Just going to continue up here, and I'm alternating my hatching now, again for the same reason. We've got one structure and then another one above it, and by alternating that hatching it separates it really easily. Up here I'd forgotten to finalise this line work, and it's a really interesting set of shapes up there. I'm not exactly sure what it is, sort of maybe like a hexagon or something. And I just get some of those lines in so that we can then supply some shadows around. And we can even hatch going around the top of the light there. So we've got our first layer of shadows going on this building, but it's really clear when you look that there's actually some really dark shadows and some lighter shadows. The dark shadows are here to start with, and you can see them by squinting. And a really easy way of getting those hatched shadows darker is just by crossing back the other way. And then there's like a deep shadow within this shadow here, and you just hatch the other way within a small portion of it, and that gets you that depth and interest. We've also got other areas which I haven't touched on yet, which we can add really dark shadows to, like inside this doorway. So we can even hatch 3 ways, one up that way, one the other diagonal, and then one vertical. And then the windows we could hatch or we could leave. Let's leave them for now. We don't want to go over the top. We can always add in later, can't take away very easily. I am just going to get some of these shadows under windowsills and things in. And then we can work out where should the shadows be elsewhere. So we should have some shadow to the side of the building. That's clear from the fact the shadow's up here, so we'll add that in. And then this side of our steps needs to be in shadow. So just come along again. And again, look, where the vertical ends and the horizontal begins, we can just change the direction of our hatching to emphasize something different is happening here. And then come back in and just add a little bit of variation to that shadow. And then going up the stairs, some of the stairs are going to be just shadowed underneath, and again this is just going to add little touches of shape. Do you see just how suddenly the stairs come to life? Despite them being very badly constructed, just really simple lines and all made up, they're suddenly just brought to life by a little bit of hatching, a little bit of shadow. We'll do the same over here and in there, and it's coming together, isn't it, bit by bit. In this window I am going to use just some filling in, and that enables me to do some hatching inside the frame, and you suddenly have 2 levels of shadow. We can do the same around the outside here, and I think the very edge of our lighthouse deserves to have it sort of emphasised a bit more, both with a bolder line. You know, we can start to bring these lines forward now that we've got this shadow drawing emphasis. I think especially here we can really bring out the top of the building versus the roof. And there should be a shadow in here, shouldn't there, where this lighthouse will be casting. And even like little shadows just behind these shutters, just little touches of shadow, nothing too much. And then I think the last bit that I can immediately see are these rocks. So we made them 3D, didn't we? We added in these edges, and again we can use those edges just to build some effective shadows, and even just then do some really loose shadows coming off them, because there'll be shadows from them onto the grass. And rocks are always a bit sort of dimpled, aren't they? So they end up having shadows on top as well. And so look, just with a pen, this sketch is really, I would say, coming to life already. And there's not even any colour on it yet. And that's all with one pen, one piece of paper, and actually don't know how long. Almost 20 minutes, so not very long at all. So, I mean, that is the power of hatching, I guess. It really can evoke a lot of shadow, shape, just texture, and it just creates character, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say fundamentally. But, of course, let's start with some lovely colours next. So we're going to go now with my normal technique for the sky. And that is with a big flat brush and loads of water, and just holding the paper up at about a 10 to 15 degree angle. Just lets you vary as you need it. You can vary the height, and you can let the water move. You can let the water move that way. Do you see how as I move it, that water's running around? And the same can happen with your pigment. So if you're just holding the paper, it gives you a little bit more control. And also I quite like drawing on a flat surface. So although I do have a drawing board sometimes I use, I think I'm just more comfortable drawing when things are flat. So I like having a work initially like this, then being able to lift it up and mobilize it and use gravity and randomness to my advantage. So that's my water. Do you see how there's little pools of water all over the page, and the whole thing's quite wet? Now this sky is definitely a blue sky, so we're going to go with the standard cobalt blue. Just a little test of how wet the page is, so pretty wet, which is good. And then we can just start dabbing some colours in. I've just refilled my cobalt, so it's still a little damp, so it's going to be very easy to pick up a lot more pigment than I intend, because normally you have to really reactivate the colours. That's fine. What we'll do, we'll deal with that as we get to it, and I think that's what happened here, for example. But then just add a bit more water and move things around. And yeah, just get that blue really doing its thing for you. Get some splashes on. And we're not going to leave this as a flat sky either, or you can if you like. So if you want to leave it as a flat sky, I'd suggest starting at the top and working down. But if you want to make it sort of move and do some really interesting things, then I normally just start at the bottom and work out. I'm not sure why, but that's what just really seems to work for me. So let's just start splashing some water in those intense bits, and we'll get some lovely shapes by accident from that. Not necessarily by accident, but from the randomness. And I've got this sponge, which is something I'm increasingly finding really useful, because do you see how it doesn't pick up all the pigment? What I'll do is just gradually move it around, and it picks up little bits but not everything, so we can just make some gentle shapes. The texture of the sponge itself gives some nice effects within the pigment as well. You can use it to just gently move things around as well as that. You can even just use it to extend and make some splashes and things off the side there. So that's getting there, isn't it? It's certainly got a lot more interesting in the last minute or so. I'm going to go back, as ever, and just pop in some more pigment, just to emphasize those areas which have become bold, and do some splashes to bring that out even more. Then I'll clean off my brush. We can use our sponge for that as well. And then just pop in some more water into these areas which have become nice and white and light coloured, and just let that water create some shapes as well. I think I want to just extend the sky, be a bit more dynamic at the top. So one thing that we could actually do, haven't done for a little while on the channel I think, if we just bring it forward and blow on it. And what that does, it both moves the pigment around at the top, it also creates shapes in here. We've got a fun little rogue brush hair in here as well. She may or may not come out. What? And if he does come out, I'm going to leave a thumbprint in there. Yeah, we got him out. So let's use our sponge just to soften those lovely thumbprint edges. And I think that's looking promising. It's not overpowering. There's some really intense areas. There's still plenty of drying to do, so it's going to move around more for us. But it's really certainly got the interestingness that I'm after. One thing's bothering me. I'm just going to bring it down so it's symmetrical on the right and the left. Perfect. Well, nothing's perfect, but certainly good enough. Now the next thing we've got, the obvious next thing, is this lovely red lighthouse structure itself, the building, not this bit. And I'm going to emphasise that. This is going to be, I suppose it's going to end up being quite primary coloured, because this cobalt blue is very primary blue. This is my Scarlet Lake, which is one of my favourite colours. Just going, this brush apparently is leaking hairs all over today. And just taking a really light, loose wash of that, I'm just going to give us a sort of initial splodge of red. And it's going to meet in a few places, and we're going to get those blue and reds mixing, and that is absolutely fine by me. It just, for me at least, it creates a really lovely simplicity, movement. If I pop the page down and let it mix, so I was holding it up so all the blue's leaking down, but if I pop it down, let it mix, and maybe even introduce a bit of red just on the edge, we'll get some interesting shapes going the other way, which I think also gives you that idea of buildings glowing and really being a part of the landscape they're inhabiting. And for me that's really magical, let's say magical, as cliched as it sounds. Now these windows are fairly isolated from the red, so I'm going to try and just paint fairly carefully around them. As careful as you'll ever see me be in this style of painting. And then we'll just introduce a little bit of water to let our lighthouse join the surrounding landscape a little bit, so that it's not just sat there on its own, its little square of red. And then let's jump down a segment. So we're going to leave the stairs for now and see what we do with them. And pop a sort of deep green into this grassy area, which I'm using a cascade green, but you could use a sap green and mellow it out with a little bit of a blue, like an ultramarine or a burnt sienna. Just play around with whatever colours you've got. Never feel constrained by, having to buy more colours, or feel free to buy more colours and experiment, but you certainly don't need to feel like art is only possible if you have exactly the same colours as someone else. So just getting these colours moving around. I want it to mix with this red, but not totally cover it, totally overdo it. And again we get this sort of shape moving around. I think we should just link up the blue and green here as well. Yeah, and that tells much more of a complete story to me now I've done that. So Glad I made that decision, and maybe we'll just do it here. And I think that's sort of starting to come together. So what should happen if we mix green and red is we get this quite neutral colour. So that's how I'm going to start off our shadows. And just, I said shadows, but I meant brickwork and stones. But I will also use something like that for the shadows. So these stones and this brick can all be this sort of just about neutralised greeny red. You can change the amount of green, the amount of red, the type of green, the type of red, and get quite different results. I think it will also work up here, at least as our initial, this time I do mean shadow. Just providing a bit more tone than a totally neutral colour would do. And when I've forgotten to pop some red up here, I think the red in this top of this lighthouse is really important actually, because it links this red, it makes it more than just a sort of one-trick pony. I'm going to use this same tone just in our windows, just really loosely, and down here. And then let's just mix up a little bit more of it, make it a bit more intense this time, just by using a tiny bit less water. So you do see how that's like a neutralised red now. And we can just, while it's still wet, just come back in and emphasise especially the shadows, but also just supply these walls and these sort of areas of brickwork with a bit of texture. I think we're ready to pop it in here even. It's quite wet still, but that'll just provide a bit of movement. Yeah, that's working quite well. So I think that, I would say, stage one of our colours done. So I'm just going to leave that to dry, because the next stage is really emphasising shadows, and I do mean shadows this time. And for that I want a little bit more control over the colours. I don't want them running around all over the place. So bear with me a couple of minutes, or just by magic I'll be back. So that drying took about 10 minutes, and you can see I've not let the whole thing dry. Some of this sky is still wet, there's certainly still water here, but we're working now on our focal area, so that's not a worry. Now I'm going to be focusing a bit more on the details, and if I wasn't lazy or trying to prove that you can use really simple tools to do whatever you want, I could change brush, so you know, maybe a size 4 or size 6, but let's just plow on with this size 10, and that will give us a really interesting looser look, I think. So swings and roundabouts, less control, more randomness, more interest from the randomness. This time I'm going to use Moonglow, which is a really lovely colour, and I know I said don't feel you need to buy colours. Definitely don't feel you need to, but Moonglow is a colour that you can't really emulate very well. It's a mix of alizarin red, I think it's ultramarine, certainly a blue, and viridian, and so it separates into this really fascinating colour, which is great for shadows and moody skies and things like that. I'm just taking it fairly strong, and we're just going to use it to bring these bold shadows forward. And just focusing on those areas we've cross-hatched before and linking them all up. And I'm just going to use the depth of this shadow to decide on where I'm going to pop some highlights. Certainly a little bit more red, but perhaps some other things as well, not sure. And we'll do these windows as well with this Moonglow. And if we just overlap but don't cover that previous tonal colour we put in, we end up with this sort of quite believable reflections in the window. And again, just on our rocks, get those shadowed bits and those areas we've hatched just to be a little bit darker, and then come back and with a little bit of water on your brush you can wash some of that colour onto the surrounding and just soften it and make it look like a shadow which is spilling over. I think down the side here we can do the same, just bring that shadow from our building all the way across and in here. And then definitely under our stairs needs to be really nice and deep in colour and tone. But we can bring it across as well. Remember how we added these hatches? So you see how as we just connect those two areas of shadow, just generating so much shape and context for what's going on there. I think that's looking pretty lively. One thing I'd actually like to do, and it may be a little late, is soften the edge here. So what we can do, just go back in with a nice wet clean brush, and if we just gently work in, we can de-emphasize that edge. So I think I regret a little bit how pigmented my brush was there, but it's fine because we've gone back in and changed things up a little bit. And we can go back in with the red now that we've got those shadows. And you could very well do the red first, or, you know, I'm sure many people would do the red before the shadows, and many times I would do the red before the shadows. But there are no like fixed rules about this, and the red will just as well mix with the shadows and overlay the shadows and be deepened by it as the shadows would, you know, mix with the red. So if you see it up here, it's just working fine. We've done the shadows first and now we're adding some highlights, and the highlights can be judged in intensity by comparing it to the shadows. I think that's done quite a nice job. We're just going to pool a little bit of that red again. And of course, I keep saying it, I mustn't forget, this little top needs to be a nice bold red, and the red extends all the way up here, doesn't it? And we're almost done. But every sketch of mine needs a little bit of extra randomness, of course. So let's just get this sort of mucky red kind of colour and just apply some sploshes in some strategic places. So certainly I love just around lighthouses especially, but anything poking up into the sky, just these idea of like random splashes around it, just connect it with that sky. And then the same, if we just mirror that down here, it brings much more unity and relevance to the whole image. Having just splashes in one area can be a little bit distracting, but as soon as they're in a couple of areas, it's part of the art, part of the technique. Do the same with the green. We can even overlap some green into our building, again just as a way of connecting things. And then just into the sky, if we take a bit more water and a bit of a looser wash of blue, and also bring the brush up higher. So before I was probably this far from the page, and that gets you a really close splatter. If I come really high, so more like that far from the page, and with a wetter brush, do you see how we get a much broader splatter all over? Obviously way less control, but that's great when you're trying to just inject some energy into the sky like that. And I think that's the colour done. As ever, for me there's always a little bit of pen work to come at the end, so I'm going to let this dry and we'll come back to it. And there we are, another sort of 5-10 minutes of drying, and we're ready to do our final little bits of pen work. I'm actually going to stick with the 0.1 pen, and a really important thing to just be aware of when you've painted with watercolours is pen will absorb differently into the paper, and the same pen used the second time will become much bolder. But that means we can just use, again, a really simple limited selection of equipment and achieve a variety of effects and interesting outcomes with it. All I'm going to do now is just re-emphasize some of our key lines, and I always talk about bringing things forward, and I don't know if you can see how, let's say this lighthouse has dropped back because of the intensity of colour and tone around it. But if we just come back in with some bold line work, then that element of bold line work brings it forward. On this side, on the right hand side of the lighthouse, just going to be careful and not do it as bold, and maybe I've just dropped some areas. Do you see, like little line space, and that helps maintain the shadow as well, because if we have really bold line work on both sides, it will imply shadow on both sides, which we don't necessarily want. Going to add a little bit more texture in here. What can be quite interesting to do when you've got shape, so let's take a different example. Let's take this wall. We've left some shapes with these layers of colour, and what we can do is we can draw around those shapes. We can sort of capture them and use them to imply a texture. And yeah, it's taking advantage of random things which have happened, which we're like, yeah, let's incorporate, let's take ownership of that and incorporate that into our image. And that's why it can be quite nice again to leave some of the line work till the end, because it lets you take advantage of the sort of random nature of watercolours. And the same with all these shadows. We can now go, where are these shadow lines? Where have they left? Where have they sort of just decided they're going to finish and dry out? And then we can capture them, and suddenly the stairs become a really defined prospect just by capturing these shadows that we've created in, if we're honest, quite a slapdash and quick fashion. We can do the same with our rock. See this lovely shape there, just capture that, and this dark shape. And the same over here. And I'm purposely leaving the back of the rock without touching it, because this is the front. I want the front forward, I want the back to stay at the back, and I want things to feel linked. So if I painstakingly go around this whole rock with bold pen, suddenly it's something completely separate from the surrounding, but it's not. It's natural, it's there, it's part of this grass, it will have moss growing on it. In real life you can't fully distinguish the back. Done the same thing with these stairs. The front of them, I've tried to define, I've brought forward those shadows. The back, where there aren't shadows, I haven't extended the shadows, I haven't extended the hatching, and I've just left these loose lines. And you can do that. You don't have to draw the whole of everything. I think these stairs are actually surprisingly effective. But if you zoom in on that side of them, if I just cover up, I've not really done anything. All I've done is drawn half a set of stairs, and that's all you need to do. I'm actually going to just redo some hatching as well, looking around, because this door, you want it to really be a door into another world. So just not quite fully block it out, but get it to be as dark as these shadows, if not a bit darker. These windows just can bring out a little bit of the metalwork of the frames and things again. And I think that's us done. So this is quite a fun lighthouse, and I suppose the things I've been focusing on are the hatching, a few fun tips on the splashes and splatters, but mostly about not having to draw everything, and it being okay to manipulate the image that you see in front of you or on a photo to fit what you want to do and how you want to do it. And don't forget as well that we've only used one pen, 2 brushes and 4 colours for all of this interesting variation. So watercolour is amazing for that. Such minimal amounts of equipment, and you can produce really interesting variations very quickly, which just look wonderful, look fascinating. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, please feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps grow my channel and get my things seen by more people. And I love reading comments as well, so please do leave me a comment if you're wanting to ask a question or give me some feedback or whatever. And most of all, of course, I hope you have a good day.